Hello, young curiosity viewers. Picture a nation of vast sugarcane fields, vibrant music, and colonial streets. Now imagine a powerful and determined group of rebels armed with a radical ideology and a desire to overthrow a corrupt government. In 1959, that rebellion, led by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, toppled the U.S.-backed dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, sending shockwaves across the Americas. But this wasn't just a local power struggle. This was the beginning of an event that would change the world forever. The Cuban Revolution, on a small island just 90 miles from the U.S. coast, became a pivotal flashpoint in the Cold War, inspiring movements for liberation across the globe and bringing the world to the very brink of nuclear annihilation. But why did this small island's rebellion have such a colossal impact? What were the forces that turned a local revolution into a global threat? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why the Cuban Revolution was a defining moment of the 20th century and why its legacy still resonates today. But before we dive into this incredible story, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to Young Curiosity for more mind-blowing insights, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing our global community grow. To understand the global impact, we must first look at the conditions that gave rise to the revolution itself. For decades, Cuba was a playground for American tourists and a source of vast profits for U.S. corporations. Under the brutal and corrupt dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, a small elite class grew wealthy, while the majority of the population, particularly in rural areas, suffered from extreme poverty, illiteracy, and a lack of basic health care. American companies controlled most of the country's key industries, from sugar plantations to utilities. This foreign dominance and the stark social inequality created a tinderbox of popular. Fidel Castro, a charismatic lawyer and revolutionary, harnessed this anger and, along with a small band of rebels, launched a guerrilla war against Batista's regime from the Sierra Maestra Mountains. What started as a small insurgency grew into a national movement with widespread support. By January 1959, the popular pressure became too great, and Batista fled the country. The rebels, with no more than a few thousand fighters, marched triumphantly into Havana to the cheers of a nation desperate for change. The world watched, but few truly understood what was about to unfold. At first, the United States saw the Cuban Revolution as just another in a long history of Latin American uprisings. The initial relationship was tense, but not hostile. However, as Castro's government began to nationalize U.S.-owned industries, including sugar mills, oil refineries, and telephone companies, and enacted radical land reforms, relations quickly soured. President Eisenhower's administration responded with an economic embargo, and Castro, desperate for an ally, turned to the only nation willing to help, the Soviet Union. This pivot from U.S. ally to Soviet client state transformed Cuba from a local issue into a central battlefield of the Cold War. In April 1961, the newly inaugurated U.S. President John F. Kennedy, with the support of the CIA, authorized a plan to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. The plan, inherited from the Eisenhower administration, involved training a force of Cuban exiles to land on the island and spark a popular uprising. The result was a catastrophic failure. The invaders were quickly defeated by Cuban forces, and the incident became a massive international embarrassment for the United States. For Cuba, the Bay of Pigs invasion cemented Castro's position and pushed him even closer to the Soviet Union. It solidified his image as a defiant leader, standing up to a global superpower, and provided a powerful narrative for his revolution. This event led directly to the most dangerous moment of the Cold War. In 1962, U.S. spy planes discovered that the Soviet Union was secretly installing nuclear missile sites in Cuba, capable of striking major U.S. cities within minutes. The world held its breath for 13 tense days as President Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev engaged in a terrifying standoff. The U.S. imposed a naval blockade around Cuba, demanding the removal of the missiles. The crisis brought the two nuclear superpowers to the very brink of nuclear war, a moment in history where humanity's fate rested on the decisions of just a few men. Ultimately, a secret deal was reached. The Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. promise not to invade Cuba and the secret removal of U.S. Jupiter missiles from Turkey. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a terrifying wake-up call that forced both sides to reevaluate their brinkmanship and led to a period of de-escalation. But it also made Cuba a permanent fixture in global geopolitics. The Cuban Revolution was not just a local victory, it became a global blueprint for rebellion. Che Guevara, Fidel Castro's key comrade, was a fervent believer in exporting the revolution. His book, Guerrilla Warfare, laid out the FOCO theory, a revolutionary strategy arguing that a small armed guerrilla group could serve as a focal point to ignite a wider popular rebellion against a government. This idea captivated revolutionaries and anti-colonial movements across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Cuba actively supported these movements, sending advisors, weapons, and medical aid to countries from Angola and Bolivia to Congo and Nicaragua. Cuba's intervention in Angola in the 1970s, where it sent tens of thousands of troops to support a Marxist-Leninist government against a U.S. and South African-backed opposition, was one of its most significant international campaigns. The revolution's example showed that a small, determined nation with the backing of a superpower could challenge the existing world order and stand up to colonialism and imperialism. What do you think is a bigger factor in sparking a revolution? A charismatic leader or widespread social inequality? Let me know in the comments below. While the international impact was immense, the revolution's domestic legacy was equally transformative. The new government, guided by socialist principles, sought to eliminate the deep-seated inequality that had plagued the country. It nationalized all foreign-owned assets, a move that sent a clear message to the world. It launched massive social programs, including a literacy campaign that virtually eliminated illiteracy within a few years. It established a universal health care system that became the envy of the developing world. The government's commitment to education and health care resulted in a highly educated population and life expectancy that rivaled some developed nations. However, the economic model had its own challenges. The U.S. embargo, combined with the inefficiencies of a centralized, planned economy, led to long-term economic stagnation. Cuba became heavily dependent on the Soviet Union for subsidies, trade, and military aid. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Cuba was plunged into a severe economic crisis known as the Special Period, a time of great hardship that saw widespread shortages of food, medicine, and fuel. Despite these challenges, the regime survived, a testament to its ideological resilience and its ability to adapt. The Cuban Revolution continues to be a source of debate and a potent symbol. For its supporters, it represents a defiant stand against imperialism and a blueprint for a more equitable society. For its critics, it is a cautionary tale of a failed economic system and an authoritarian government that suppressed dissent and individual freedoms. Today, Cuba is at a crossroads, navigating a new, more complex geopolitical landscape. It continues to clash with the U.S. over the embargo and other issues, but it has also begun to slowly and cautiously open its economy to limited private enterprise. The revolution's legacy is still profoundly felt across the globe. It proved that a small nation could punch far above its weight on the international stage. It inspired movements for change in every corner of the world, and it served as a terrifying reminder of the dangers of the Cold War. In conclusion, the Cuban Revolution was not just a local event, it was a catalyst for a superpower conflict, a blueprint for global rebellion, and a social experiment that transformed a nation. Its victory in 1959 was a shot heard around the world and its ripple effects have shaped the political and social landscape for decades. The story of Cuba is a powerful testament to the idea that a single event on a single small island can indeed change the world. Thank you for watching, and remember, stay curious,